G'day folks, and welcome to this sort of glancing view of Tide of Iron. This is a 2007 release by Fantasy Flight Games, so it's pretty old, but it's one that I've kept in my collection, and I think it's a staple tactical war game. It's one that I keep coming back to despite only having the base game and only having a small number of scenarios. This was released, as I said, back in 2007. At the time, Memoir 44 was about 4 years old, and I owned Memoir 44 at the time. And I was just looking for something a little more. I found the scenarios in Memoir 44 a bit random. Sometimes they lacked theme. It could be quite chaotic with those just die rolls flying all over the place. Tide of Iron then came out, and it was just a slight step up in complexity. It looks similar to Memoir 44, models, miniatures of a similar scale, similar maps, the hex grid, everything looks very similar, but Tide of Iron just sort of refines some of those elements of Memoir 44 and just takes it to that sort of one extra step up. So if you like Memoir 44 and you're looking for something else, you can kind of get that in the Tide of Iron base game. In typical Fantasy Flight Games fashion, this is quite a well-produced title. The rulebook is well illustrated and quite clear. It is quite hefty too, so at first glance it looks like quite a complex, confusing game, but certainly if you get someone to teach it for you, it's pretty easy to get into, and as I said, it's only a slight step up from Memoir 44, and experienced gamers will have no problem sort of easing themselves into this. You also get a scenario guide with this, which lists the 6 scenarios that come with the base game. That doesn't sound like much, but these are quite long scenarios. They're much longer than your typical Memoir 44 scenario. They are bigger and they take longer to play. And although there's a small number of scenarios, they provide a decent amount of replayability, different situations. So the first scenario is basically the Americans are defending while the Germans need to attack and secure basically 3 hexes beyond that defensive line. In the second scenario, the Germans are defending, the Americans are attacking, they're trying to capture these buildings over a pretty narrow map. And in the third scenario, again, the Germans are defending, the Americans are attacking up this big hill. But the strategy decks that you're given in the scenario change the playthrough of this of each scenario. The construction of your bases can change things. So you can play the scenario, sort of the same scenario 3 times in a row, but you might construct different bases, draw from different command decks and employ different strategies. So it's quite a decent amount of replayability in the game. Overall, it is, for a game that is just a slight step up from Memoir 44, it is, I think, a lot more satisfying on a tactical level. There are more tactical considerations to make. It's more interesting. Yes, you're rolling dice, but there's a lot you can do to mitigate that luck. You can place your defenders in wooded terrain. You can give them an elite infantry member to give them extra cover, or an officer to help rally your pinned units. All these things which can affect the replayability of the game. Now, at the start of the scenario, you'll design your bases, and these can be modified throughout the scenario. And each base that you construct usually contains, say, 3 or 4 miniatures. They could be regular infantry, elite infantry, which are slightly more powerful, your officers, which have special abilities. You might add a machine gun crew or a mortar crew. And sometimes you'll add special ability tokens. So you might have an anti-tank gun or an engineer, a medic in your squad, which enhances their abilities. So you're really tailoring your individual squads to fulfill certain roles. So in the first scenario, the Germans begin with a couple of engineers, which enables them to dig entrenchments and to avoid razor wire. Engineers basically let you move through razor wire without stopping. All these things let you, again, sort of tailor your squads to the scenario, to your plans. You might set up, well, the Americans on defense, for example, might set up their machine gun squads in good defensive terrain, set them up with op fire, so they'll be able to shoot at oncoming Germans, and sort of place them at the front of their defences or key approaches. Now, most scenarios begin with the action phase, where the player who holds the initiative, basically this rifle, takes their first turn. And they will get to activate a number of their units based on the activation limit of the specific scenario. So the first scenario allows the person with the initiative to take 3 actions with their units. Now a unit typically takes 1 action and then they become fatigued. And the actions are pretty common. They're basically advance, which is move your unit. They can direct concentrated fire, which is basically where they hold their position and fire upon an enemy. They can fire and move, which is where they have reduced movement and reduced firepower. They can prepare op fire, which is where basically they hold in place and prepare for an enemy unit to advance on them and they opportunity fire. Or they can assault and basically charge an enemy hex. There are a few other options and special rules like activating strategy cards and so forth throughout the scenarios, but they're the main actions that you'll be doing. Once a unit or a base performs an action, they become fatigued and they're done for the rest of that round. Your opponent then takes their turn. They take, let's say, 3 actions. They fatigue those 3 units, and then it goes back to you. So you go back and forth. So both players are constantly engaged throughout a round. Once all units have been activated in a round, the action phase ends and you move on to the command phase. Now in the command phase, you determine who controls objectives. In some scenarios, you'll score victory points, but mainly you'll be gaining command points for controlling objectives based on their value. So if you hold, for example, if the Americans hold 5 command points, objectives with 5 command points, they draw 5 command tokens. You can then spend these command tokens by activating your hand of strategy cards. The scenario will tell you what decks of strategy cards you have available. You'll draw a starting hand and you pay your command to play these cards. These can do things like bring on reinforcements, give you artillery support, air support, snipers, various other things, increase your morale and so forth, and you'll spend your command to play these cards. So in the game we played, my son loved bring on reinforcements, so he was drawing from the reinforcement deck and spending most of his command to bring on more troops onto the board. Now, the game comes with 2 player reference sheets, 4 pages of information on the American and German units, a summary of the game actions and how the round plays out. Once you begin moving your units, you look at this and you see how many movement points your units have. They then have a range based on whether they're firing at infantry or armoured units, and a firepower based again on whether they're firing at infantry or armoured. Various terrain in the game has different terrain costs and effects. So, for example, woods costs infantry 2 movement points to move into, it costs vehicles 3 to move through, it's blocking terrain, and it provides cover, basically defense for units in that terrain. Now when a unit shoots, they basically roll die based on their firepower. So an infantry squad with 4 regular infantry units shooting at infantry might roll 1 die per regular infantry for 4 dice in total. Now at normal range they'll hit on a 5 or 6, but they can increase their range. At long range they'll hit on a 6, while at close range, basically adjacent targets, they'll hit on a 4, 5 or 6. But once they've done that, the defender also gets some defense dice, and they'll roll a number of dice equal to their armor for armored units plus their cover, which is typically based on terrain. So there might be an infantry unit defending in woods might roll 2 dice on defense. And basically you subtract the attacker's hits on their black dice from the defender's defensive cover and armored dice rolls, those 5 or 6s. So the defender might actually block all the incoming attacks. Now there's also, just to make this extra a little bit interesting, you have 2 different types of attacks. You have a normal attack, which basically inflicts hits on the defenders, or you have a suppressive fire attack. Now again, normal hits will just hit the infantry, whereas a suppressive attack will pin, and once these pin markers build up, it will disrupt a squad that takes too many pinned results. Now a pinned unit can't move or fire or take special actions. A disrupted unit will rout. So whilst your normal attacks actually cause damage, often you just want to pin down a defender to enable to attack them, or you might want to rout them. So you'll just inflict these suppressive fire results. Your mortar units, for example, roll more dice when they attack with suppressive fire. So they'll roll 4 dice for suppressive attacks, but only 2 dice for normal attacks. So you're often choosing to do these suppressive attacks to basically pin down your enemy. Vehicles are really special in this game. The armoured units are very powerful. They get this innate armour. The Panzer IVs have 4 armour dice, plus if they're in the woods, that's a bonus 2. The half-tracks and trucks can ferry your infantry units around, so they can very rapidly, if they're using a road, move around the board and outflank your opponent. The scenarios might dictate placement of wire or trenches, which can help defenders, slow down the attackers and so forth. You can assault the enemy. I mentioned this earlier. This is basically where you charge in and both attacker and defender roll dice. It's very risky for the attacker if they're assaulting a healthy defender, but it can pay off if they score some good hits on the attack. And again, whilst you're considering all these things, you've got these special units like your elite units. You have these this hand of command cards, which you can often play during the action phase to add, for example, a sniper. If a sniper comes out, from memory, you roll 3 dice. If you score a 6, you can hit remove any unit on that squad base. So you can target the opponent's officers, for example, or their elite infantry. Those elite infantry have slightly better firepower, and they have sort of an innate cover, so an innate defensive dice against suppressive fire when they're in a squad. So whilst the game was originally released in 2007, there were expansions throughout 2008, 2010, 2013, and then in 2014, a company called 1A Games got the license to reprint basically a re-release, a second edition called Tide of Iron: The Next Wave. But from what I can gather, this was quite hard to get. I can only find a small number of people who have this, and I couldn't see the availability of this. This apparently improved the rules a little bit, but was essentially, for the most part, a re-release of the original 2007 core game. Now, looking around today, it's very difficult to get a copy of Tide of Iron. The prices on eBay are very high, but if you look on Board Game Geek or other forums, you can see copies available for $40, $50, $60. For that price, I'd highly recommend it. It's, in my opinion, better than the base game of Memoir 44. You get a lot more in there. It's a much more interesting game for a similar price. Also keep in mind, this is a huge box. This is a Fantasy Flight big box game that comes with dozens, if not hundreds, of little miniatures and bases. It's a modular board system, so 2-sided little A4 size boards which can be constructed to create some very different scenarios. If you get a chance, check out Tide of Iron.